What is up, everybody, and welcome to my ranking of all of the Spider-Man movies. We just got No Way Home released last weekend. Hopefully all of you guys have went out to the theaters to see it, because it's definitely something that's worth seeing in a theater with a gigantic crowd, if you feel safe, of course. But now we have 11 movies to talk about. We've got 10 live-action movies and the animated film, the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which I have not reviewed on this channel. That's the one movie of this entire franchise that I have not reviewed yet. Maybe one day I'll get there. Maybe when they do the second one, I'll go back and review it. But we do have 11 movies to talk about. Now, like I said at the beginning of my Spider-Man 2002 review, Spider-Man is kind of in a conversation of its own regarding comic book films and eras and generations. Every other franchise, we pretty much just had one, maybe two, but Spider-Man's been done 3 times now. And each of the iterations kind of defines a generation. And each generation kind of, for the most part, tends to stick with whatever ones they grew up watching. And I'm very much in the Sam Raimi camp. So with that being said, this is a very subjective list. This is a list of movies that I'm obviously ranking off of how much I enjoy them, how much they mean to me. This is not going to line up with your list. It shouldn't line up with your list. If you just started watching Spider-Man movies with the Tom Holland films, I would expect you to have those higher than some of the films that I have here. And I would expect that a lot of the Raimi films that I have a lot of nostalgic love for might not have aged well, or might not have been as amazing for some of you that are a little younger than me that it was when I first watched it. So there's a lot of different things, perspectives, taste, nostalgia, all of that mixed into the pot for how we all view this franchise. So with that being said, number 11 for me is going to be The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, even though this is at the bottom, and even though this is clearly the worst that these films have had to offer, at least in my own opinion, I could still watch this movie and have a decent time with it. I think that the strength here is obviously Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone and their relationship. I think it's even stronger than it was in the first film. There's amazing special effects here. There's really good web swinging scenes. There's really good fight scenes. It's a very colorful movie, which kind of gets away from that dark color palette that they had in the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. It's fun to watch. Unfortunately, this movie has about 8 or 9 different creative voices, a lot of which are studio heads in suits that don't know what the fuck they're talking about when it comes to making movies, and all these ideas got thrown into the pot for this movie, where you had Mark Webb that wanted to do a certain movie, you had Sony that wanted to set up a whole bunch of other things, a bunch of spin-offs, a Sinister Six movie, an Amazing Spider-Man 3, we got to mandate this be in here, you got to talk about this character's got to be in here, and so the entire movie, you have battling tones, you have battling stories, you have battling character arcs, and so aside from the central relationship between Spider-Man and Gwen Stacy, the movie is just yanking you in 1,000 different directions, trying to gain your attention and trying to set up so many things, and completely losing sight of the goal of what this movie should have been, which is to be a great movie, a great sequel to Amazing Spider-Man, to be a great story. This is just a gigantic commercial for a bunch of things that they wanted to do later on. And it got cut off at the knees because this failed at the box office, at least compared to what they thought it was going to do. A lot of people did not like it, critics and audience alike, and so they just chopped it off there, and that was the end of the Amazing Spider-Man movies. So I still have a decent time with this. I don't dread rewatching this movie. I can enjoy many moments of this movie, but as a complete package, it is a shit show. Number 10 is going to be Venom: Let There Be Carnage. Now, I seem to be in the minority with this one. I don't know if it was my mood. It's one of those things where I'm so in the minority that I think it might be something wrong with me. But who knows? Maybe I'll watch this movie again and be like, no, I don't see whatever all the rest of you guys see. I do enjoy this movie on a certain level. I did enjoy the first Venom movie, and I was expecting to walk into this one, and if nothing else, just to enjoy it slightly more than the first film. But this just felt so generic to me. And just like with Amazing Spider-Man 2, I mean, every single movie on this list, I can watch and have a good enough time with it. This movie's not trying to be anything more than what it is, which is just a schlocky, goofy, fun time in a superhero world with a crazy villain and a crazy hero in Venom and Carnage. And it does that, but something about a lot of the humor, something about the way that the story is just, everything is trimmed out of it. There's like no moments to breathe whatsoever. It just moves to plot to plot to plot to plot to plot and just bounces through the movie until the end. And a lot of the disappointment for me came from Woody Harrelson's iteration of Carnage. They just didn't really feel like that great of a villain. Didn't really feel like this huge, gigantic smackdown that we're going to get between Venom and the ultimate evil version of himself, which is Carnage. Just didn't really feel like that. It didn't really feel any more exciting than the symbiote that we got in the last movie, to the point where if they keep going with Venom, which they clearly will, no more symbiotes, please. Do other villains. So, I don't hate this movie. I didn't dislike it. I gave it a positive review. I think I gave it like 3 out of 5 or something like that. But it's just a movie that I saw in theaters. I went, okay, that was fine. And it'll be a while before I have the desire to rewatch it. It was just okay. Coming right above that at number 9 is Venom. And Venom, while I did like it more in my first initial theater experience, I haven't really had the desire to rewatch it. So it's kind of along the same lines of what I just said with Venom, Let There Be Carnage. It's a pretty good, decent little comic book film. This and Venom, Let There Be Carnage kind of feels like the type of comic book film we used to get like in the early 2000s. And so it doesn't really quite fit with the climate nowadays and with what we expect from a superhero movie. But this first film, I liked Eddie Brock. I liked Tom Hardy in the role. I thought that a lot of the good chemistry and good lines between him and Venom, and some of them kind of antagonizing each other, I thought it moved along at a pretty decent little clip. Some silly, some stupid stuff here and there, but I enjoyed it for what it is. I enjoyed it slightly more than Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Maybe I'll rewatch both of them a couple of months from now, and I will agree with most of you where Venom, Let There Be Carnage is a little bit better, but I've only seen these movies once, which was my first theater experience, and I walked out having a pretty good time with Venom, where Venom, Let There Be Carnage, I walked out and went, all right. Number 8 is The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, I was not ready for a reboot of Spider-Man when this came out. I was still scorned, still a little heartbroken that they cut off the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire storyline. I thought it was way too soon to try to reboot with a new actor and a new version of Spider-Man. And so a lot of my initial reservation for this movie was because of a lot of that. But I've watched it numerous times, and like I said in my review 2 weeks ago, this is a movie that I enjoy. It's a movie that I think is a good Spider-Man movie, but so much of it just feels like a Sony product to me. It feels so much like they're just trying to sell this Spider-Man thing to get more money because of how much money they made with the previous trilogy. And so despite the fact that Andrew Garfield is possibly the best actor who's ever played Peter Parker, not my preferred Peter Parker, but he's certainly the best actor, the fact that him and Gwen Stacy, Emma Stone have amazing chemistry, the special effects are pretty damn good here. There's some really good sequences involving web swinging and all of that, and I think there's some really good character moments in this movie as well. Beyond all of that, it's just kind of run-of-the-mill, once again, Spider-Man origin story with a bunch of needless changes because they felt desperate to be different than the Tobey Maguire version. So instead of organic shooters, he has web shooters. Instead of Uncle Ben saying the great power comes great responsibility line this way, he says it a little bit differently. Instead of him going through and having the spider bite happen this way, it gets bit in this situation. And so all around, it was just a bunch of the same stuff that was just presented differently. It almost felt like, I'm gonna get copyright claimed here for using my buddy Sean Chandler's term, but it was almost like a Taco Bell movie, but not in the sense that Sean uses it. Taco Bell movie in the sense that they repackage the same exact shit that they've given you for the past 40 years, but they call it something different. Hey, come try our new Grande Chalupa Burrito Supreme Cheesy Explosion. And then you go take a bite out of it and you're like, dude, this is a fucking burrito with cheese on top of it. This is the same shit that you've given me before. You just called it something different. Number 7 is gonna be Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, I had huge expectations for this movie. I went off the rails when I saw the first trailer and it had that total John Hughes vibe. That trailer reaction's still up, by the way. You can go check it out. And it was a movie that I was just very intrigued and excited for what they could do with Spider-Man, going back to the roots, going back to the high school, not having to bother themselves with the origin story, putting it in the MCU. So many uncharted territories regarding Spider-Man. And for the most part, I like a lot of this movie. I like Tom Holland as Spider-Man, just like I did in Civil War. I like a lot of the special effects. I thought that Michael Keaton was amazing as Vulture, one of the best villains for sure, not only in the MCU, but Spider-Man. And a lot of the character interactions in this movie I did enjoy. What I did not enjoy, and what I continuously do not enjoy with this version of Spider-Man up until No Way Home, is that it doesn't really feel like Spider-Man. It doesn't really feel like this traditional story. It doesn't even really feel like he's the star of his own show. This movie specifically, he's basically Iron Man Jr. Like, Spider-Man has so many amazing abilities and so many things that makes him stand out on his own. Why does he need this Iron Spider suit with all these different Alexa and all these other technologies. It doesn't really make sense to me. So as many times as I've rewatched this movie, that's always a frustration that I have. I like his interaction with Tony Stark. I like Tony Stark being a mentor in the movie and having a kind of a smaller role, but it just kind of degrades how amazing the Spider-Man character is for me. So I enjoyed this film. Like I said, every movie on this list I've enjoyed, and we've gotten progressively better as we've gone on, but this is the one Tom Holland movie that just feels the most like he's not exactly the star. Coming in just above that is Spider-Man Far From Home. A lot of the same things that I just said can be applied here to where it feels like he's not necessarily the star of his own movie. You got Nick Fury and all of them coming in to give him technology and to give him help. You get these super glasses from Tony Stark once again, which is a big plot point in the movie. But where I prefer this movie slightly over Homecoming is that I like Mysterio a little bit better as a villain than I did Vulture. As much as I love Vulture, I just like Jake Gyllenhaal getting to play serious and then play crazy maniacal. I loved all the sequences where Mysterio was going like full mind-bending stuff and he's putting Peter Parker into all these illusions and dreams. I thought that was some of the most amazing Spider-Man sequences that we've ever seen. All the fight sequences with regarding him in the third act I thought was great. And I didn't mind so much the plot point that Mysterio was this scorned Stark worker and had all these other people that were helping him build out all these fallacies with these huge boss fights so that he can get a hold of this technology. I thought that was a pretty cool plot point. For the numerous times that they've used that trope in the MCU where somebody is a villain because they don't like Tony Stark, this is the one that worked the best for me that I can think of. And overall, where it left the movie off with Mysterio dying and outing Peter Parker and setting up all these things, I had a better initial experience with this movie, and I've had a better lasting experience with this movie than I have with Homecoming. Number 5 is going to be Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now, let me say this clearly. Couple of movies above this, one for sure, I would not necessarily argue that is a better movie than this one. I think that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is an amazing animated film. I think that it is a very good Spider-Man story. I think it's a very unique animated tale, and I understand a lot of people that have this in their top 2 as their number 1. I totally get it. Me personally, something about animated films, I just don't really have a whole lot of desire to go back and rewatch them. As many that I love in my life, as many of the ones that I loved as a kid, as many of the ones that I've seen as an adult that I've grown a lot of love for, they just don't really enter my head a whole lot. So when I think about like Spider-Man, I'm in the mood for a Spider-Man movie. I might be more likely to grab some movies lower than this movie on this list before I'll grab Into the Spider-Verse. It's just kind of who I am. So that's the reason why it's here. It's rewatch value is why it's at number 5. Quality-wise, if I was going purely off of that, trying to do an objective list on something that you can never do an objective list on, it'd probably be top 3 for sure. So with that being said, number 5, Into the Spider-Verse, damn good animated film, talking about the Miles Morales Spider-Man as a nice fresh change of pace. You get away from a lot of the not necessarily tropes, but the story beats that we've been through so many times with Peter Parker. You get a lot of different takes on villains here. There's a very emotional story at the core of it regarding Miles and his father and his uncle, with the uncle being the Prowler, being the villain. And there's a lot of intertwining plots and multiverses and different villains and Kingpin and all these different things that's balanced really well and able to be realized in a very cool way because it's an animated film. And they don't have necessarily the shackles that you would have trying to tell this story in any form of a live action movie. Now, I do think that the animation style, the way that they kind of stutter the frame rate a little bit, it's unique, but it always bugs my eyes a little bit. It takes me like a good 15 minutes to really get into it with the movie. And I don't like the look of Kingpin at all, just the hulking body with the little tiny head. I always thought that was a little silly. So those are the only 2 things really that I can knock this movie on. Other than that, damn good animated film. Number 4 is going to be Spider-Man 3. Now, I know this movie has a lot of problems, and I know most of you have this at the bottom or near the bottom of your list. But if you watch my full review, which I did a couple of weeks ago, despite all of the glaring issues that this movie has, and despite all of the potential that it had and kind of squandered a little bit with trying to overstuff and do so many different things, which they then repeated in an even grander fashion with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I still have a lot of love for this movie. I have still always enjoyed it. I have never thought that this was a bad movie or a terrible movie or even a mediocre movie. despite always seeing the problems right there, full on display from the first time I saw this film in theaters. But because I love these characters, this iteration of the characters, because so many of these storylines that were started in 2002 come to a really nice close here, and I do like all the different villains we get here. I like the Harry Osborn version of Green Goblin. I like the version of Venom that we get. Not the version of Eddie Brock, but the version of Venom that we get. I like the Sandman version that we get, to where all of the errors here, all of the mistakes that they made, they're not these huge detrimental issues for me. They're just something that aren't quite as good as they could have been. So it's no secret, you had Sam Raimi that wanted to do a Sandman movie, you had Sony that wanted to do a Venom movie. Of course, they had to do Harry Osborn no matter what the main villain was going to be, because that's been set up for 2 films, and they compromised and tried to do it all in one movie. Didn't quite work. Didn't work for a lot of people. But I think that there's a lot of great emotional moments in this. I think there's a lot of really good fight scenes, a lot of good moments with Peter Parker. I actually enjoy the douchebag Peter Parker sequence. I think it makes a lot more sense to me than it does to a lot of other people, so that's something that is not a big issue for me as well. And by the end of the movie, the whole theme of forgiveness regarding him and Harry Osborn and them mending their ways before Harry dies, the whole theme of going through with Flint, Marco, and Sandman, even though I thought that was kind of a forced plot line of him retroactively being the guy that killed Uncle Ben, the whole way that forgiveness works in at the end there with him, the way that forgiveness works in with him and Mary Jane by the final frame, I still think this is a really good 3rd chapter. So I know I'm in the vast minority with this one, but I will always love and defend Spider-Man 3. Number 3 is going to be Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, first of all, no spoilers, so don't run away scared. I'm not going to give anything away. If you do want a full spoiler review, though, I did do one 2 nights ago, which is just over an hour long. I go through the entire plot of the movie, so check that one out if you want all my spoiler-filled thoughts on this movie. But number 3 for No Way Home, this is the one that has the most potential to move up on this list, being that I've only seen it once. I'm still kind of absorbing some of it, and on a second watch, things could go up, things could go down for me. But I thought overall this was definitely the best of the Tom Holland Spider-Man films, obviously being where it is on this list. And I thought that it was just a damn good balance of being a good Spider-Man story, having a lot of fan service, having a lot of epic storytelling, and a lot of multiverse spanning characters and everything that's being included in this, but at the same time being a nice little rounded out 3rd film for the storyline, the story beats, and the character arcs that we've got from Spider-Man Homecoming until now. So overall, I had a damn good time with this movie, and it gives me a lot of hope for the future of this character, the Tom Holland iteration. The only thing keeping this thing out of the top 2, honestly, is just nostalgia and just the amount of times, the amount of rewatches that I have gone through number 1 and number 2. And so, like I said, over time, this could easily bump up to number 2, or maybe even one day it'll be my number 1. Who the hell knows? It's a damn good movie. But right now, with one watch and with no nostalgia whatsoever being put into the mix, Spider-Man No Way Home is number 3. Number 2 for me is going to be the original Spider-Man from 2002. This was just a huge landmark movie for me when I was a kid. I was only 12 years old, and we had not really had comic book movies really in the certainly not the quality that we have nowadays, but even in the pop culture consciousness that we have nowadays. So you had Blade, you had X-Men, but Spider-Man was the first one that really was like, holy shit, like we can really do this. We can have massive, huge, awesome superhero movies on screen, and they can be good. Like I've said numerous times, I am a diehard fan of the Sam Raimi trilogy. I love the Tobey Maguire version of this character. I love all of the different villains. I like the campy tone mixed with the serious and the emotional. I think that they all have been pretty damn good, and they're definitely important to me. This first film, just giving that classic origin story, was great. You have Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin, which is awesome, one of my favorite Spider-Man villains. I thought that all of the way that they set up all the different relationships regarding Peter and Uncle Ben, Peter and MJ, Peter and Harry Osborn certainly, and even between Peter and Norman Osborn, I thought was damn good. There's times in this movie where certain things don't age so well regarding some special effects. There's certainly some aspects to the campiness that is very exclusive to those Sam Raimi movies that you necessarily couldn't do today and be successful. So I understand why some people have kind of grown out of love for them. I understand why some people watching them for the first time years later don't quite get what all the hype was about, but it's one of those classic times. You had to be there. you had to be there. But number 2 for me is still Spider-Man 2. I love this movie. I think it's a perfect Spider-Man film. From the way that they expand on everything from the first film and make everything better. The special effects are better, the fight sequences and the action sequences are better, the individual character moments are better, the way that they have grown the relationships for Peter Parker and MJ, Peter Parker and Aunt May, Peter Parker and Harry Osborn, the way that you have Alfred Molina here as Doc Ock. I think he's clearly, for me at least, the best villain of the live-action Spider-Man films, because he kind of rides that line of being somebody who is good and brilliant and still has a soul while doing evil things that he's kind of being controlled to do. So he's a villain that just has a lot of layers to him, and I love the fact that he came back in No Way Home because it just added even more layers. The sequences here, like the whole train sequence, is still the best Spider-Man sequence that we've ever gotten in my mind. The way that everything wraps up so emotionally regarding Peter and MJ and him finally having to kind of not only reveal himself to her, but accept her love. You know, there was a whole thing where he didn't want to be around her because he didn't want her to be unsafe, and by the end of the movie he finally gets to embrace that. So it's a movie that I think is damn near perfect. Not really a whole lot here that I can bitch about, and it's one of my favorite superhero films of all time. So Spider-Man 2, number 1. So what do you guys think of all 11 Spider-Man movies? Let me know down below what you think. What is your ranking? Which ones are your favorites? Which ones do you actually hate, if you hate any of them? And try to give me reasons down below, because it's more interesting than checking out just a list. I actually see why you like these ones more than the ones below it. So please do that. Like and share this video. Hit the subscribe button if you're a fan of Spider-Man. We're still going to do a Spider-Man villains ranking later on this week. And of course, we're going to have more Spider-Man movies to talk about in the future. So if you're a fan, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss anything from that. Thank you guys for watching, as always. And remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.